In the bitter heart of a snowbound English winter, Raven's Hollow stood wrapped in white silence, its towers rising like frozen sentinels over acres of sleeping land. The estate belonged to the Duke of Raven's Hollow, for in 20 years of age, a man admired with the same intensity he was avoided, for beauty had made him visible, and pride had made him unreachable. Society praised his composure, his lineage, his fortune, yet whispered that his heart had been locked away long before it had learned to open. He ruled his household with immaculate courtesy and absolute distance, permitting no warmth that was not demanded by duty, and no guest who threatened the careful order of his solitude. It was into this cold dominion that Lady Seraphina Ashcombe arrived at dusk, her carriage wheels groaning against ice, her breath caught between dread and resolve. She was 23 and very beautiful, though beauty was the least useful currency she possessed. Born to gentility and reduced by her father's ruin, she carried herself with a dignity sharpened by loss, her manners precise not from indulgence but necessity. The servants saw it at once and judged her for it, reading her quiet as calculation, her stillness as strategy, for England had taught itself to mistrust women who endured without complaint. The Duke received her in the great hall beneath chandeliers dulled by winter smoke. His expression betrayed nothing as he observed her approach, noting the careful simplicity of her gown, the absence of jewels, the composure that neither pleaded nor performed. He had been warned of her arrival by distant relations who spoke of her as a burden disguised as hope, and he had already resolved that this visit would be brief, correct, and unremarkable. Politeness was extended, seats were offered, and tea was served, yet beneath the ritual lay a verdict already reached. Dinner passed in measured exchanges, every word weighed and restrained, the air thick with unspoken assessment. Seraphina answered questions directly, without embellishment or false modesty, a habit that unsettled him more than flattery ever could. He had expected artifice, had prepared himself for practiced smiles and veiled ambition, but instead encountered a woman who seemed more concerned with preserving her self-respect than securing his favor. This, inexplicably, irritated him. To his mind, refusal to strive was merely another form of manipulation. When at last the servants withdrew and the hour grew late, the Duke rose, signaling the evening's end with impeccable timing. He stepped closer to her beneath the arching shadows of the hall and lowered his voice, careful that no ear but hers should be wounded by what he intended to say. "Leave at dawn," he whispered, each word deliberate and unsoftened. "I'm not interested in you." It was not cruelty, he told himself, but efficiency, an act of mercy meant to prevent gossip before it could take root. The sentence struck her with the sharpness of ice against bare skin, yet Seraphina did not flinch. Years of quiet endurance had taught her that composure was armor, and she held it firmly now. She inclined her head, neither protesting nor pleading, though humiliation burned hot beneath her calm exterior. In that moment, she understood precisely how she was seen, not as a woman with a history and will of her own, but as an inconvenience to be managed before it disrupted his carefully preserved life. Outside, the snow thickened, pressing against the windows with insistent persistence, and the household retreated into murmurs. Servants whispered of her impending dismissal, already composing narratives of her failure, while Seraphina was shown to her chamber with the courtesy reserved for those already halfway gone. Alone, she removed her gloves slowly, aware that morning would likely carry her away before Raven's Hollow ever truly knew her presence. Yet propriety, that silent tyrant of English society, intervened where sentiment did not. The storm worsened, roads became impassable, and custom demanded that a guest, however unwanted, remained through supper the following evening. Thus Seraphina stayed, suspended between rejection and necessity, her dignity intact but fragile, her future uncertain as the falling snow. The Duke, returning to his solitude, believed the matter settled, unaware that in dismissing her so coldly, he had set in motion a reckoning that neither pride nor winter could indefinitely delay. Sleep did not come easily to either of them that night. though for different reasons, as the house settled into uneasy stillness. Raven's Hollow, long accustomed to emotional quiet, seemed to hold its breath, as though the walls themselves sensed an imbalance newly introduced. In the distance, wind howled across the moors, erasing tracks and certainty alike, promising that what arrived with the snow would not depart unchanged. Morning waited, inevitable and slow, bearing consequences neither yet possessed the courage to imagine. Morning arrived at Raven's Hollow without mercy, the snow thicker, the sky a pale, unyielding gray that denied both departure and illusion. The Duke learned at breakfast that the roads were impassable, the storm having claimed the hills and turned the lanes into treacherous white corridors. He received the news with irritation masked as indifference, nodding once, already calculating the inconvenience of delay. Lady Seraphina, he was told, would remain until evening at the very least, as custom demanded. He agreed stiffly, unaware of how profoundly that small concession would trouble his ordered existence. Seraphina descended later that morning with quiet composure, her bearing unchanged despite the night's private humiliation. She neither avoided the Duke nor sought his notice, conducting herself with a restraint that unsettled him more than reproach might have done. Observing her from across the breakfast table, he saw no trace of wounded vanity, only a measured politeness that refused to bend into gratitude or resentment. It struck him, against his will, that she behaved as though his judgment were merely one opinion among many, not a sentence upon her worth. Throughout the day, the house stirred with subdued curiosity. Servants lingered longer than necessary, exchanging looks and half-finished sentences, already weaving stories from scant facts. A dismissed guest lingering under the Duke's roof invited speculation, and Seraphina understood the danger well. Rather than retreat into invisibility, she asked to assist with the evening meal, offering the request simply, without emphasis or appeal. The housekeeper hesitated, and used to ladies of rank requesting practical involvement, yet consented, sensing something resolute beneath the young woman's calm exterior. In the kitchens, warmth replaced grandeur, and Seraphina moved with practiced familiarity among copper pots and hanging herbs. She spoke little, yet when she did, her knowledge revealed itself in quiet competence rather than display. She selected game suited to winter scarcity, prepared a gravy enriched by slow patience, and set aside preserved fruits gathered in seasons long past. It was not elegance she pursued, but honesty, a meal shaped by memory rather than fashion. The servants watched with curiosity, softening into respect, their gossip momentarily silenced by her steady hands. That evening, the Duke entered the dining room expecting formality and endurance, nothing more. When the dishes were served, he noticed the difference immediately, though he could not have named it at first. The aroma was familiar, evocative of forgotten comforts rather than aristocratic excess. He tasted the meal with habitual reserve, yet the first bite startled him into stillness. The flavors were unpretentious, deeply warming, and strangely intimate, as though they belonged not to the house, but to a life lived beyond it. He looked at Seraphina, then, truly looked, and found her watching him with neither triumph nor apprehension. There was no attempt to claim credit, no invitation for praise. In that moment, the Duke felt an unfamiliar disquiet, the unsettling recognition that she sought nothing from him beyond civility. The realization disturbed the foundations of his assumptions, leaving him momentarily adrift. Conversation resumed around them, yet the air had shifted, charged by something unspoken. Later, as the household settled into evening quiet, the Duke found himself lingering near the fire rather than retreating to his study. Seraphina joined him at a polite distance, book in hand, prepared to endure the remaining hours with dignity intact. Their exchange was brief, restrained, yet altered by the shared knowledge of supper's significance. He thanked her, formally, and she acknowledged the courtesy with equal reserve, though something warmer flickered briefly in her eyes. Whispers resumed as night deepened, servants noting the Duke's uncharacteristic pause and the guest who had not been dismissed. Rumor, once awakened, could not be easily quieted, and Serafina was keenly aware that every additional hour beneath his roof risked her reputation further. Yet as snow continued to fall and firelight softened the room, she sensed that the evening had shifted something irreversibly. The Duke, returning to his solitude, carried with him the unsettling knowledge that indifference no longer came easily, and that the simplest offering had breached defenses years in the making. The storm tightened its hold upon Raven's Hollow, sealing the estate within a world reduced to snow, stone, and firelight. Days passed without the possibility of departure, and with each passing hour the boundary between guest and host thinned in ways neither had anticipated. Lady Serafina moved through the house with quiet deliberation, careful never to presume, yet no longer shrinking into obscurity. The Duke observed her from a distance at first, struck by the absence of desperation he had so wrongly expected, and troubled by the steady grace with which she bore uncertainty. Their conversations lengthened as winter nights demanded companionship. They spoke first of harmless things, the landscape, the season's severity, the customs of households long past. Yet even these exchanges carried a peculiar weight, for both sensed how rarely they permitted such candor. The Duke found himself listening more than speaking, an unfamiliar position that unsettled and intrigued him. Serafina, for her part, spoke with a measured honesty that revealed neither complaint nor self-pity, as though she had long ago made peace with loss and refused to be defined by it. One evening, as snow struck the windows with renewed insistence, they sat nearer the hearth than propriety strictly required. Firelight softened the Duke's severe features, revealing a youth worn thin by responsibility rather than indulgence. Serafina noticed it then, the loneliness he had mistaken for strength, and her voice gentled without intention. She spoke of her childhood before ruin, of laughter dimmed but not erased, and of the discipline required to endure society's quiet judgments. He listened in silence, every word dismantling assumptions he had relied upon for safety. When at last he spoke, it was with an honesty that surprised even himself. He confessed his aversion to expectation, the suffocating certainty that his life had been charted before he could object. Affection, he admitted, had always seemed a risk greater than solitude, a weakness easily exploited. Serafina did not argue. She only observed that isolation, too, exacted its price, though society praised it more generously in men of rank. Her words landed gently, yet they struck with precision. The intimacy of that exchange lingered, neither acknowledged nor dismissed. Over subsequent evenings, the space between them diminished almost imperceptibly, shaped by shared silences as much as speech. Yet beneath the growing understanding lay an awareness of danger. Raven's Hollow did not exist beyond scrutiny, and the longer Serafina remained, the more her reputation hovered at risk. She sensed it keenly, and one night, gathering resolve, she spoke of departure, not as reproach but necessity. The Duke responded with restraint, though the thought unsettled him more than he wished to admit. He did not urge her to stay, nor did he accept her decision with ease. Instead, he questioned her reasons, and in doing so revealed his own reluctance. Serafina met his gaze steadily and declared she would not be the subject of pity or speculation. Whatever bond had formed between them deserved honesty, and honesty required choice rather than convenience. Her resolve stirred something in him that pride alone could not suppress. He saw then that her dignity was not fragile, but fiercely guarded, and that any future, however uncertain, would demand his courage as well. Before either could speak further, a servant's quiet interruption reminded them of the world beyond the firelight, of duties and watchful eyes. The moment fractured, yet its significance endured. That night, sleep eluded them both. Serafina lay awake, determined to leave before sentiment compromised her self-respect. The Duke paced his chamber, confronted by the realization that his carefully preserved distance had not protected him after all. Snow continued to fall, deepening the silence around Raven's Hollow, as if urging a reckoning neither could postpone much longer. The house, once indifferent, now seemed charged with expectation, waiting to see whether restraint would prevail or whether truth would finally demand its voice. Morning broke with a fragile brightness, the storm finally loosening its grip upon Raven's Hollow, though snow still lay heavy across the land. Preparations for Lady Seraphina's departure commenced with quiet efficiency, servants moving carefully, aware that something delicate hovered between farewell and confession. She accepted the arrangements with calm resolve, her composure unbroken. Yet beneath it lived a sorrow she refused to dramatize. When she descended the stairs for the last time, the Duke waited in the hall, formal as ever, though his stillness betrayed unrest. They spoke briefly of roads and weather, of the propriety that now permitted her journey. Each word skirted what mattered most, until silence itself grew accusatory. At last, the Duke broke it, confessing that dismissal had been easy, but separation was not. His voice remained controlled, yet urgency threaded through it, exposing vulnerability long denied. Seraphina listened without triumph, only attentiveness, and replied that she would not remain where she was merely tolerated. Affection, she insisted, must be chosen freely, or it became another form of captivity. Her carriage stood waiting beyond the doors, steam rising from the horses like breath held too long. The Duke followed her into the cold, snow crunching beneath boots that had seldom hurried before. As servants pretended not to watch, he asked her to stay, not as guest nor obligation, but as equal, willing to risk rumor and consequence alike. The request cost him visibly, pride bending beneath sincerity. Seraphina hesitated, weighing honor against hope, her gaze steady upon his. She told him she would not barter her dignity for security, nor surrender herself to uncertainty without promise. If he wished her beside him, he must do so openly, before the world that had so readily judged her. The Duke considered this, the weight of lineage and expectation pressing upon him, then answered with a clarity that surprised them both. He declared his intention to marry her, not from convenience, but devotion, prepared to endure society's scrutiny rather than lose her respect. The words transformed the cold air, rendering it suddenly bearable. Seraphina searched his face for hesitation and found none, only resolve earned through struggle. She accepted, not with exuberance, but with quiet certainty, recognizing courage when she saw it. The servants' whispers gave way to astonished silence as the carriage was dismissed and the household reorganized around a new truth. Their marriage followed swiftly, restrained yet resolute, conducted beneath winter skies that softened at last. Raven's Hollow, long governed by distance, learned warmth through shared purpose. In choosing love over pride, both found a freedom neither had anticipated. The estate endured, as estates always do, but within its walls, something rare had been secured. Even as snow melted and seasons turned, those who passed through Raven's Hollow spoke of a winter when dignity triumphed, and two solitary souls altered history quietly, forever. It was not a tale of spectacle, but of resolve forged in silence, and of choices made when retreat would have been easier. The Duke understood then that love demanded visibility, a willingness to be known and judged. Seraphina understood that trust required risk, that shelter without honor was merely another kind of exile. Together, they faced the dawn without illusion, united by a vow shaped not by fantasy, but by truth. Raven's Hollow watched in quiet, its stones bearing witness as history shifted not through conquest, but through courage. The future remained uncertain, yet for the first time, neither feared it, for they had chosen it deliberately. Such choices, seldom celebrated, are the ones that endure, whispered long after snow has vanished. They will be spoken of cautiously at first, questioned by those who mistook restraint for coldness, yet time would soften judgment. Guests would later remark upon the warmth of the halls, unable to name its source. It lay not in tapestries or fires, but in the quiet accord between two souls who had met rejection and answered with integrity. Memory, like winter, preserves what endures. Their union became less a romance than a testament, proof that pride can be unlearned and dignity rewarded. The house slept easier for it, and so did its master and mistress, equal at last. In years to come, when snow returned and storms pressed close, Raven's Hollow would remember, holding fast to that winter when two lives altered course. The world moved on, as it always does, yet within those walls, love remained, quiet and steadfast, a promise kept long after whispers faded. Thus ends not with spectacle, but with certainty, inviting the telling yet again. For some stories ask not to dazzle, but to endure. They endure because they are true, and because somewhere, beneath falling snow, two hearts chose courage over fear and changed everything forever, quietly, irrevocably, together at last, in winter's hush, remembered always by love.